This is Harry Judd for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. I'm delighted once again. Seems like a weekly occurrence, but certainly not complaining. Joined by Dan Rafael. First of all, Dan, how are we, sir?
I'm doing great. We just come off a really good weekend of fights, so what could be better, right?
Huge weekend of fights. And let's start bias of me, but let's start in the UK. Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall. Edge of your seat stuff. As soon as the first bell went, as anticipated, huge fight. And again, such a massive platform for women's boxing. But Dan, you watched it from the States. Take me to what you saw.
I saw a terrific fight. When that fight was taking place, I was at Barclays Center in Brooklyn covering the Deontay Wilder fight card. So the preliminaries were going on, but had the laptop open, and myself and some other folks that were there were watching not only that fight, but the co-feature with Michaela Mayer and Alicia Baumgardner. And that main event between Shields and Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall was a really outstanding fight. I mean, what a just a fantastic year for women's boxing when you have that kind of caliber of fight between those two ladies. And then you also have, the fight between Serrano and Taylor, also a tremendous battle, on the women's side of the sport. And they're not that far apart in terms of how long it's been. It just shows you that if you put on the right fights and you have the right matchups and there's a good promotion behind it, like there was with this fight, like there certainly was with Shields, Marshall, and Serrano and Taylor, that people will turn out. I mean, apparently they sold out the O2 Arena. Boxer announced earlier today that they had drawn in excess or about 2 million viewers on Sky Sports for this women's card, which is a tremendous number. It shows that the sport on that side of things is healthy. The top women are willing to get in the ring and fight each other. And Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall, they let it all hang out. And they put on a hell of a fight. And I've said, it's not rocket science here. To build the sport in any, whether it's men's fights or women's fights, you have to, and to have the great fighters get a certain level of popularity and a legacy and be able to put themselves in the history books, you have to have an opponent that brings out the best in you. And Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall, to my estimation, they brought out the best of each other. And I hope that, not right away, I hope that down the road we'll see a rematch between these two women and they can do it again and put on another big fight.
It was slated as the boxer versus the puncher, but I certainly was surprised, firstly, by the pace of the fight from the first bell. Certainly surprised by that, but also surprised in how well Claressa seemed to take all Savannah's power. Claressa seemed to trade with Savannah really well.
No question. I've watched every single one of Claressa's professional fights. And the thing about her, that the reason why I gave her the edge to win the fight, picked her to win the fight by a decision, was because I felt like she would do so kind of handily and really do it by just outboxing Savannah Marshall, who was obviously, I feel like, a bigger, stronger woman compared to her. So I was a little surprised that she stood in there and slugged it out with her in large stretches of that fight. But what she showed was that not only is she an excellent boxer, but she also can take a punch, and she also landed a lot of solid punches. I mean, they both took heavy shots, and they're both to get credit for that. They're both to be commended. I like the fact that they were able to, there was no complaining about the decision on the Marshall side after the fight. They showed sportsmanship. I don't think they're ever going to be best friends or anything like that, but they were respectful to each other. They put their arms around each other, and they gave it up to each other, because there's no doubt about it that that's the toughest fight that Claressa Shields has ever had in her life, amateur or pro. And I'm sure that that's the toughest fight that Savannah Marshall has ever had in her career, amateur or pro. And it was a very competitive, close fight. And, credit to them.
You mentioned one of the scorecards there. Peter Fury was quite angry with one of them. There was 7-3, I think, in favour of Claressa. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, what did you make of the scorecards? Did you think it was wide, close? Again, I do believe that it was a hard fight, and some of the rounds were hard to judge.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can appreciate he's upset about it because he felt like maybe his fighter deserved a little bit better. But when I said that nobody complained about the scorecards, I just meant that there was no one saying that it's a robbery and that really that Savannah deserved to win. I didn't hear anybody saying that they felt like she won the fight. Just maybe it was a little bit closer than maybe the card indicated. But when you have a close fight like that, that's not out of the realm of possibility at all, because, if you're giving the one person the score, even if it's a close round, it's not that big of a deal. I've made the point now, it's not common, but I have seen fights over the years where You could have a fight where every single round within those 3 minutes is highly competitive. You're just tipping one fighter over the other, round after round after round. And so in the end, maybe you wind up with a scorecard that's rather wide, a 9-1 kind of fight on the cards. But the reality of the match was that each of those rounds was close. You just happen to score most of those rounds for one of the athletes. Now, it usually doesn't happen like that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. So in a fight like this, whereas I think everybody who watched it would say, yeah, of course, there were some close rounds, and a card winds up 7 rounds to 3, that's not an insult to the fighter that only got the 3 rounds. It's just that the person who was scoring the fight gave the majority of those rounds to the other fighter. And so I didn't have a problem with the cards at all. I thought it was a great fight. I thought they both showed well. I don't think either one of them did anything but lift their stock, even Savannah with a defeat. And she'll be back, I think, in bigger and better fights, certainly with the numbers that were put out by a boxer in terms of the number of people that watched the fight, the number of people that bought tickets to the fight, how many of those people, they broke it down statistically on the number of ticket buyers and viewers that were women. Certainly made inroads in a women's audience. Obviously, boxing has largely been a men-dominated sport, both in the ring in terms of the athletes competing as well as the consumers who are watching and buying tickets. So, I mean, there's nothing to be negative about on this. And listen, it was a hard promotion from the standpoint that there was a lot of disappointment, a lot of money that was spent, and they had to call it off at the last minute when the Queen passed, and go through the efforts to reschedule for a month later. So they definitely overcame some difficult hurdles, but I think in the end, if you ask anybody involved, it was worth it. They did a hell of a job.
Yeah, I think they did. Being there, having the honor of being there, the crowd it was a different type of crowd as well. It was, a lot of young women there, a lot of families there, and it was a great atmosphere. And also, like you mentioned, I think Savannah certainly had conducted herself, especially during the loss. I think she conducted herself brilliantly, and she shouldn't be disheartened by her performance. It was incredible what they both did. But
I agree. I'm going to tell you one thing. A few years from now, when, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, there's another big women's card, or there's another group of young rising female boxers, maybe after the a future Olympic cycle, there will be a boxer that will be interviewed by you, by me, by some other boxing journalist, and they will say what inspired them to become a professional boxer was attending that show on Saturday or watching that show on television.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main things which hopefully will come out of that. Moving on to Claressa as well. 3-time undisputed, 2 different weight categories. Where does she go? Where's the competition for her now? She's talking about moving down to 154.
That's a very good question. I mean, she's only had 13 professional fights, but she's already accomplished as much as many fighters accomplished in their entire career. She's only 27 years old. She's also fighting professionally in mixed martial arts, where she hasn't had that kind of success. She did take a loss in one of her early fights. She's only had a couple of fights in the PFL, but she's going to continue to do that and to see if she can reach her goal, which is to become a champion in both MMA, and she's already done it in boxing. So that's something on her mind, and that's her. She'll take some time off from boxing now with the Savannah fight behind her, and now she'll turn her attention more towards preparing for her next mixed martial arts fight. But in terms of her boxing career, I'm not sure where she goes from here, because she's been a unified champion at 168 pounds. She's now been the 2-time undisputed at 160 pounds. People should remember that it's only a 2-time undisputed situation, not because she lost, but because she became undisputed. She gave up one of those titles, the WBO belt, which Savannah then later won, and then Claressa took it back from her in their fight on Saturday. She's also been undisputed at 154. And if she goes down to 147 and opts to try to cut that weight, certainly if she can entice one of the other top women down there to get in the ring with her, perhaps Jessica McCaskill, who's the undisputed champion at 147. Obviously, that would be a pretty big fight. I'm not sure if how serious Claressa Shields is about doing that, about dropping even more weight. In women's boxing, it's not so unusual. Most of the time, we follow the men's side of the sport, and you see the champions, they win a title in one weight class, then they move up in the next weight class. We see that all the time. Women, it's much more common for them to do something in a particular weight class and then drop down in weight. And if you take a look at some of the women that have won titles in multiple divisions, take, for example, an Amanda Serrano. She's gone, all the way up to as heavy as 140 and come all the way down and has fought in a featherweight, but before that she was at a bantamweight. She was moving down in weight. So in the women's side, it's not totally uncommon. So if Claressa can do that and not really hurt herself physically, bring on McCaskill for the undisputed welterweight. That would be quite a story. If McCaskill could beat, somebody like Claressa in a high stakes fight like that, and certainly if Claressa could become another undisputed champion and get another weight class.
One of the main things which came out of the weekend after the main event, after the show finished, was the need or the want or the desire for 3-minute rounds within women's boxing. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, some would argue, and this is the other side of the argument, that with 2-minute rounds, the action straight away, it's like, it's straight in it. You don't get a respite. But what are your thoughts on 3-minute rounds?
I've never really had too much of an issue with the 2-minute rounds. If they decided to go 3-minute rounds, I would be perfectly fine with that. If they decide to keep it at 2-minute rounds, I don't have a problem with that. I know there are some places where the default is 2-minute rounds, but if the two sides ask for the 3-minute rounds, they'll allow it. I covered a fight a long time ago in the state of Michigan in Detroit. It was a Layla Ali fight who was on a Mike Tyson undercard. This is a long time ago. And, I had thought, okay, women's boxing matches are 2-minute rounds. And much to my surprise, on that night, the rounds were 3 minutes. And I don't remember if it was because the two women requested that or that was just the rule in Michigan that was different than other places. So there are places, is the point, where there are 3-minute rounds allowed. Some of the women have been outspoken that they would prefer 3-minute rounds. You make an accurate point that if it's a 2-minute round, that yes, of course, they get right to the action. The women that ask for the 3-minute rounds, you'll hear them say things like, well, just when the rounds are getting heated up at 2 minutes and I'm getting ready to maybe stop the girl, or I'm getting her in trouble, or I've got her hurt or winded or whatever, then suddenly you hear the clapper and the round is over. I don't think that anything's going to change unless there's a real serious movement on behalf of the star women to really say, I'm not fighting if I don't get 3-minute rounds. I would think, though, that they'd be okay with the 2 minutes at this point because they're finally being, the women at the top now are starting to make real money. It was different when you weren't really making anything. But the women that fought on Saturday, at least at the top of the show, were making, the biggest purses that you see in women's boxing. 7 figures are certainly close to it. So, if you can make that kind of money and only have to go 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes, I would think that would be a benefit to you. So I don't have a strong opinion either way. Obviously, there's, if you listen to things, for example, the WBC will talk about, they have had medical studies that say that there are differences between men and women, that there's physical reasons to go 2 minutes in terms of a women's fight compared to a men's fight. I'll leave that to the doctors and to the scientists. But from my point of view, as a person that writes about boxing and follows it and talks about it, I don't have a strong opinion either way. Women's tennis, they get paid big money and they put on big matches and they play best out of 3 sets, and the men play best out of 5 sets. And I can't say I hear a lot of women yelling and screaming that we should be playing best out of 5. So, I'm okay either way is the point.
Yeah. I think I'm pretty much on the same wavelength as you, Dan. Moving on swiftly to Mayer Baumgardner. Again, another terrific fight. Baumgardner, in my opinion, was the better start. Mayer started relatively slow, I thought, during the beginning of the fight. Obviously with the split decision and Baumgardner coming away with the win. Mayer was upset, but again, with the fight that close, I don't think you could have been obviously Mayer upset, but as a fan, upset either way. It was so close. But do you think the right decision was made?
I didn't have a problem with it either way. It was a close fight, like you said. I think in reality, when Mikaela Mayer goes back and watches it, where she will be upset with herself is she's the one I thought that started slow. She more or less gave away the first couple of rounds. And it's not to say that Alicia Baumgardner had these huge rounds in rounds 1 and 2 or 3 or whatever, but she did a bit more and put Mikaela right behind it right off the bat. So, if she went out and fought as hard in those first couple of rounds as she was doing later on in the fight, perhaps she would have gotten a draw, perhaps she would have edged out. Again, both women's fights, both of those main event fights were very, very close fights. I didn't have a problem with the score. I would have had a much bigger problem had they given Savannah Marshall the decision over Shields than they did by giving Alicia Baumgardner the decision over Mikaela Mayer. I have no problem with that outcome of the fight. It was close. It was a split decision. Both, again, similar to the other fight, both of those women should do nothing but hold their heads high and be proud of the event that they put on, of the fight that they put on, of the effort that they gave. And it was good for the sport. And I think Mikaela Mayer, she has enough ability and enough star power and charisma and a good team behind her in terms of her management and promotion and everything. She'll be back. And, it's similar to the other fight, Harry. I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think it will happen right away. But if there's a rematch down the road between Mikaela Mayer and Alicia Baumgardner, I don't think that would be anything that we would all be at all be disappointed if we saw it.
Yeah, I think I want to see a rematch with both of them. I thought they were terrific fights. So I'd love to see them, but I agree with you. Certainly the issue.
One thing, if they have a rematch, they will be on separate cards. I'm sure they will not put them back together because those are two obvious main event level fights at this stage.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think. Well, Baumgardner came out and said that she's not giving May the rematch, and I do think Clarissa's the same. But again, things
Down
change
the road, down the road.
down the road in boxing. But again, you mentioned at the start of this call, you at Wilder, Robert Helenius, Wilder been out best top part of a year, slightly over a year. But again, what a knockout! What a way to come back into the boxing frame.
I thought that it was going to go not long. I did think Deontay Wilder was going to score a knockout, maybe early. I did think it would take him a little bit longer to get into things. I figured, he's coming off the knockout to Fury. He's been out of the ring for a year, although Helenius also, his last fight was on the undercard of Wilder and Fury 3. So they were both coming off the same layoff. The difference, of course, is that Helenius was coming off, two knockout wins in a row and upsets, and Deontay Wilder was coming off two knockout losses in a row in the two second and third Tyson Fury fights. My point is, I thought it might take him a couple of rounds to sort of, shake out the cobwebs, get back in the groove, put on a little show for the fans, get that confidence and that swagger going. He's had a lot of sparring rounds with Robert Helenius. They know each other, so there might be a little feeling out process and all that. And that did not happen because as soon as Helenius dropped his hand and went towards him, bang, right hand. I mean, the thing about the knockout is, and look, that was the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, which is where the fight took place, is a place where now Deontay has headlined five times, and he scored absolutely sensational knockouts in all five of the fights. But the difference in my mind as I'm watching it is that in those other fights, and not just the Barclays Center fights, but just Deontay Wilder in general, he's a guy that he'll stalk you. He's not a big mover. He stands flat-footed, and he comes to you. And he sets up that big right hand with his jab, which is pretty good, and it's so long, and that's how he gets a guy. He gets him looking out for the jab in their face, and then he comes with the right hand. This was a fight where he did not really rely on that. He was moving his legs, he was bouncing up and down, he was on his toes. I say to the person next to me, I'm like, this guy looks like he thinks he's a lightweight, the way he was moving around the ring. And so he got the job done and set up the knockout shot with his legs, not with his jab. I thought that was maybe that was by design, by maybe something that he and his trainer Malik Scott thought to work on a little bit more. I think he also, and he talked about this in the post fight as well as in the pre-fight, that he was going to be lighter for this fight. Remember, he put on weight for the two Fury fights, knowing that Tyson Fury was going to come in much heavier than he. But Deontay's always been at his best when he's been under 220 pounds. His natural weight as a heavyweight, he's not necessarily watching exactly what the scale is going to say, but he comes in 215, 212, 216, whatever, came in 214 pounds. And even though he was giving away almost 40 pounds to Helenius, he is more comfortable fighting in that 12 to 15, 16 area in terms of his weight. And it showed because he looked good, he looked strong, he looked quick, and he scored yet another just absolutely monstrous knockout. I'm here to tell you, Harry, I've been doing this a long time. And even before I was writing about boxing, I watched boxing a lot, for many, many years before I covered boxing, my whole life practically. I don't care what anybody says. Deontay Wilder is one of the greatest punchers in the history of boxing, period. And you can talk about any of the other great heavyweights. I've said this elsewhere. You want to give me Mike Tyson, you want to give me George Foreman, pick a heavyweight. Vladimir Klitschko, Lennox Lewis, go on down the line of great heavyweight punchers. Deontay Wilder stands with any of them.
He certainly does. And like you mentioned, he slimmed down, he's on the back foot, and yeah, that's not what we normally know Wilder for. But moving on now, though, how hard is it to match him? Because he's high risk, low reward at the moment. Where the fight is for him next, really?
Well, I don't think it's low reward. Low reward means you don't make money. And if you fight Deontay Wilder, you make money. Robert Helenius, I'm sure, made the biggest purse of his career, 7 figures for sure. Made a ton of money for that fight. So the reward is there, but the risk is there also, obviously. Deontay Wilder is one of the biggest names in heavyweight boxing, one of the biggest names in boxing, brings out fans, brings excitement, brings out publicity. So I would think that the top heavyweights, they would want to fight him. And again, it was Robert Helenius, so I don't want to get too carried away. So Deontay Wilder does have vulnerabilities. And if you're a more athletic fighter or maybe a quicker fighter, you might be able to take advantage of that. Look what Tyson Fury was able to do. Now, if you look at Wilder's record, he's won every single fight against everybody he's ever fought, not named Tyson Fury, and won all of those fights by knockout, except for the one decision against Bermane-Stiverne when he first won the WBC title back in 2015. Of course, he then had a rematch later with Bermane-Stiverne and knocked him out in the first round. Also, one of those spectacular first round knockouts at Barclays Center. You ask who he's going to fight. So he mentioned after the fight, yes, maybe Andy Ruiz, which is the other half of this WBC four-man box off. You know, Deontay won the fight against Helenius on Saturday. Back at the end of September, it was Andy Ruiz defeating Luis Ortiz and the what was termed the other semifinal of the WBC. So they will mandate Andy Ruiz against Deontay Wilder at their upcoming convention. And the winner of that fight then would become the WBC's mandatory for the title, which is currently held by Fury. And he also mentioned about the possibility of fighting in Usyk. If they can't make a fight between Usyk and Fury, Deontay Wilder would certainly bring a lot to the table in that fight. As I have said, and I don't know if there was a will to do this, but you know, in my perfect world, I want to see still title or no title. I want to see Deontay Wilder get in the ring and fight against Anthony Joshua. That's a fight we should have seen a few years ago when they were both undefeated, and it would have been for the undisputed title. That is not going to happen, obviously, but I'd still like to see those two guys fight it out with each other. You know, two great personalities, two fun, exciting fighters, two guys who bring drama, who have stories, who have charisma, who just, you know, make it dramatic, win or lose. So I want to see that fight very, very much. But I don't care what pick a heavyweight, any of the top heavyweights. You know, the Deontay Wilder's team should be calling, because after being out for a year and coming back for a first round knockout, I hope it doesn't take another 6-8 months for him to get back in the ring.
What do you think of that Ruiz fight, the final eliminator fight with Ruiz?
You mean if he fights against Wilder?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an interesting fight. I mean, it's two former champions, two guys who bring certain top qualities to the ring. Andy Ruiz has great hand speed and has shown that he can handle himself against anybody. He may not look the part because we've seen, you know, him come in, you know, not focused and, you know, not look so good against Joshua, for example, in the rematch. But when he's on his game, you know, whether you think he's in great shape or not, he can punch, he can box, he's got quick hands, he's got quick feet. He was a good amateur. He's got a good pedigree. To me, for him, it's just about the work ethic. How much work is he going to put in to get prepared for the fight? I have to believe if he's matched up against Deontay Wilder in that kind of high stakes fight, you know, he's going to be in a pretty good shape and good spirit. Certainly, having learned his lesson from what he didn't do in preparation for the rematch with Joshua. So I think that would be interesting. And from Wilder's point of view, you know, he's always in good shape for his fights and always comes to fight. And the thing why that would probably be a pretty big deal, at least here in the United States, is because they both have levels of popularity, but they draw from different fan bases. Andy Ruiz has a huge fan base that is on the West Coast of the United States, California, the Mexican Americans and Mexican fans that come out for him to buy tickets, buy pay-per-view and that sort of thing. And Deontay, you know, his audience is not that Mexican crowd. He has more of the East Coast crowd, you know, down south where he's from. Certainly a large black audience that gravitates towards his fight. So if you put them together, you bring in the money and the exposure and the attention from both of the fan bases, which helps make a much bigger event. I think that would be a highly popular fight if they were able to make that. And as far as how the fight would go, you know, the Deontay Wilder I saw fight, even if it was for less than 3 full minutes on Saturday, he's going to be a tough guy to beat because the way that man can punch and with the spirit he came into the ring with in a really good spot mentally, like really wanted to be there. That's tough to overcome if you're Andrew Ruiz and you're going to be at such a height disadvantage and in my opinion, a power disadvantage. That's a tough fight.
Yeah, you pretty much answered all my questions regarding that one. I think there was a lot of anticipation in terms of how he was going to be in the ring after such a long time out. Obviously, you mentioned that the knockout loss to Tyson Fury. Sticking with heavyweights, like we've been speaking about Tyson Fury's movements for seems like forever recently, but there are rumors again that, you know, Chisora seemed to completely dismay the rumors, but there is talks and again rumors escalating to do with a third fight, which is Chisora Fury. What do you make of that one? Is there really an actual need or desire to see a third one?
Maybe by Derek Chisora, maybe by Tyson Fury, but I mean, let's just be honest. And I'm nothing against Fury. He's heavyweight champ. If he wants to take an optional fight against, you know, a non-star level opponent, and while he thinks he's waiting for an Usyk fight for the undisputed, I have no problem with that. I mean, that's his right. I mean, he's fought the tough fights recently. He did have the 2 fights back to back against well, he fought Dylan White in his last fight, but before that he had the fights with Deontay Wilder. So that's 3, tough names in a row, 2 times against Wilder, once against White. So if he wants to take this kind of fight, I'm fine with that. But the drama about who I'm fighting, I'm going to fight Joshua, and then you tell me that you're fighting Emmanuel Char, and now you're fighting against Derek Chisora, who you already beat twice, once by a knockout, once by a decision, both in dominating fashion. You tell me, is there anybody who wants to see that? I mean, who wants to see Fury-Chisora 3? Not me. I don't know anybody that wants to see that fight again. For what point? For what purpose? I mean, I know the British fans are very passionate about their top guys, but if you could be the most ardent Tyson Fury supporter in the world, you have to be disappointed by that fight. If you're the biggest Derek Chisora fan, you're probably happy he's getting another shot, but you're like, oh my God, my guy's going to get wiped out again. I mean, to me, it's a waste of time. You can put that as your headline on this video. Tyson Fury, Derek Chisora 3 is a waste of time.
Too much on for me, Dan. Yeah, I think there's many people that agree with that. But there are many people out there, and totally you can agree with that side as well. That Chisora does bring the war. We've seen him in absolutely terrific fights last time out. But again, are we going to see the exact same story play out in the third fight?
Would you give? I'm going to ask you the question now.
Okay.
Would you give Tyson Fury any real chance of losing that fight, or Derek Chisora any real chance of winning that fight?
Depends how it goes, Dan. I'm going to sit on the fence.
Stop that. You're full of shit. The answer is no.
The answer is no. But there are many people, and again, you can sympathise with those people that do want to see Chisora. Chisora's obviously coming off that age where he wants the big money fights, and what other big money fight other than Tyson Fury?
Well, I mean, I'd like somebody to give me big money to write a story, but that's not my. I'm not. Nobody owes that to me. Derek Chisora is not owed a shot at the heavyweight title. I mean, if you're going to fight for the heavyweight title, I believe you should do something to earn it. And again, I like Derek Chisora, nothing against him, but in my opinion, a life and death battle with the 40-plus-year-old Kubrat Pulev is not enough to qualify you to fight for heavyweight title. Just because Tyson Fury wants to give maybe his old pal, an annuity, a retirement parachute, that's his right, but it doesn't mean we have to be interested or have to want to, get excited and help build it up and promote it and all that.
Another pointless rematch, I guess, was Haney Kambosos. Again,
that's different though. That's a totally different situation.
Explain, Dan.
Derek Chisora, Tyson Fury 3 is a pointless rematch because A, nobody asked for it. B, they've already fought twice in complete wipeouts. This would be a third time them fighting. And where it's different is because the Haney Kambosos fight, that was a unification fight in June for the undisputed title. In the business of boxing, and I'm not saying that I agree with this, but there are certain things that happen that allow the big fights to take place in the first place, and that is a rematch clause. And similar to the way that Deontay Wilder fought Tyson Fury for the third time after being knocked out in the second fight, in a completely one-sided fight, they had to fight the third time because Deontay Wilder had that right in a rematch clause in their contract. He exercised it. Fury tried to get out of it by fighting Joshua. He went to an arbitration, and Deontay Wilder won, and they fought a third time. Now, it turned out to be an epic, classic, all-time great fight of the year. In terms of Haney and Kambosos had the right to the rematch. To make the first fight, for us to get the undisputed champion that we all wanted to see in the division, they had to have that right in the contract. Kambosos lost the first fight. He exercised the rematch. So this rematch was based on a contractual obligation. The Tyson Fury versus Derek Chisora is not based on anything other than the fantasy of Tyson Fury wanting to give his old buddy another shot. And by the way, Kambosos against Haney may have been one-sided like it was in the first fight, but it was a much more entertaining fight for the crowd. And now that has been done, and now Haney gets to move on. So I also looked at that fight as, there was also bigger business afterwards. Like, we don't know what Tyson Fury is going to do. We hope he fights Alexander Usyk sometime next year if he has this December fight against Chisora or somebody else. In terms of the Haney situation, we all kind of knew that he was going to fight somebody, whether it was Kambosos or somebody else. But the end result was going to be, as long as Lomachenko wins October 29th, there's a very strong likelihood that they will fight each other in what's a very, very big fight. So whoever that Haney was going to fight, it was going to lead to the ultimate fight against Lomachenko, who was supposed to fight George Kambosos in the first place, but he bowed out because of what was happening in his home country, and he stayed behind and made himself part of the defense of the country of Ukraine against the Russian invasion. So, but there is a big difference when one is contractual, and there was public demand for the fight in the first place. Even if it didn't go so well, the rematch happens. Totally different than a third fight between Fury and Chisora that's just sort of pulled out of thin air.
Does he? Yeah. Is this the only fight for Devin Haney if he stays at that weight, the Lomachenko fight? Because the images that circulated, obviously during the weigh-in, they both looked emaciated. Really, it didn't look healthy at all, to be honest. And a lot of people are calling for Haney to move up, but is this Lomachenko the only fight at that weight category?
Well, in terms of what you mentioned about the weigh-in and how they look, yeah, he did not look great. That was those were surprisingly tough pictures to look at. But he certainly didn't look like it impacted him on fight night because he looked really good against Kambosos in the rematch. And he's not the first fighter that I've ever seen that looked terrible at a weigh-in that comes in looking at totally different in the fight. I mean, I covered a lot of Eric Morales fights. He's the one example when this topic comes up. He would go to a weigh-in and you're like, how can he possibly fight? The man looks like he should be in the hospital, not on a scale. And he would, put back the fluids and he would have a good dinner and he would come into the ring and kick your ass the next night. And he looked like, everything was great. Devin Haney can still do this because he's only 23 years old. So at age 23, it's a lot easier to do that than it is as you get older into your late 20s, into your 30s, where the weight making process is much more difficult. So I think, and again, I'm basing this on my experience of covering these guys a long time, not necessarily medical background, but the point is at that age, you can overcome that and deal with that much more easily and much more safely than when you get older. So for the time being, I think Devin, as long as he has desire to do it, he could still make that weight another couple of times if necessary. I do believe that if he does get the Lomachenko fight, which would probably be in the early part of next year, after that, win or lose, I think he'd probably be looking to move up. He said to me and others in the pre-fight, I interviewed him, I know others did also, his desire was not only did they become the undisputed champion, but he wanted to do what a lot of champions, the other greats, do, is not just give up the titles right away, but defend the titles. So he did that in the rematch with George Kambosos. He would probably be able to do that in a fight with Lomachenko. And at that point, if you've done that, and then it's time to go up, I guess. And listen, the other guys that he'd be looking to fight, the other top lightweights, some of them have already gone up to the 140-pound weight class. So we're talking about Teofimo Lopez, Orion Garcia. Tank Davis is still at 35, but he's fought at 140, and he'll probably be moving up at some point in the future also. My point is those other top guys are also starting to gravitate towards 140 also. And they'll be there in and around that weight for a while. At 140, he'll have plenty of competition. But I do think there's one more big fight for him at 135 against Lomachenko. It's a classic kind of matchup, the old veteran with the great skills against the young guy with the great skills. And that's a really interesting, significant fight. And, Lomachenko's got to get past Jermaine Ortiz on October 29th. Jermaine is a younger fighter. He's undefeated, doesn't know how to lose. He's looked pretty good in recent fights. He's putting together like at least a decent resume. And, Lomachenko, he's not unbeatable. He's really hard to beat. You got to make him the big favorite, but you never know at his age and some of the injury problems that he's had and coming off a layoff and all the things that go into getting together. It would be a big upset, but upsets happen.
Well, Dan, again, being called a full of shit by you, it's got to be a career highlight for me. That is fantastic. But again, Dan, we really do appreciate your time on Boxing Social, and I will be probably emailing you again in the next few days for another chat. But again, enjoy your week, mate, and we'll catch up very soon. But again, Dan, thank you so much for your time, mate.